Hi, Roy here. So I am not an expert in AI. I'm not a researcher. I haven't tried every tool that has come out in the past 6 months. And I am honestly constantly feeling like I'm playing catch up. However, I'm paying pretty close attention to the space. And when I'm talking to other e-commerce operators, I am a little bit farther ahead than most of them. So I'm here just to share with you what context I have as a former developer and AI hobbyist on what is actually working, what's going to be working in the future, and what is more buzz than substance. Now, once again, not an expert, so this is just my observations, but these are the observations that I put together to share with a mastermind group of e-commerce operators that StatPid hosts. And I thought it might be useful for a broader audience as well. The primary things that everyone's likely to have seen in the headlines are image generation and language generation. So image generators like DALL-E especially came out last year to significant fanfare. And then we've also seen things like ChatGPT, which is based on a large language model. And its latest edition is a huge leap forward. ChatGPT 3 and 3.5 were some of the first really successful natural language generators that I've seen, at least. A lot of this has been happening in the past few months alone, though. The DALL-E example, which was really the first thing that caught my attention in the recent past, one of the images that was hitting all the articles was this one. You can see it on DALL-E's homepage as one of their examples, a photo of a teddy bear on a skateboard in Times Square. As of last year, this looked like magic. Now, you can see that the wheels don't quite look right. If you zoom in, it doesn't quite hold together. There's some things that we've now become accustomed to seeing as indicators that it was generated by AI. But still, it was incredible at the time. Now, not that much longer afterwards, we have other models using different engines and different training data, coming up with different types of results, and it's accelerating quickly. So this is DALL-E. They still haven't really changed the core product as far as I can see since launching last year to the wider audience, but they have added other features like outpainting and things like that. So they're not standing still, but this was an image that I generated for this deck, an auto mechanic working on a classic car. You can't really see the car. The auto mechanic's face is a little distorted. He's got sort of a droopy thing going on one side, and there's just not a whole lot of the subject matter as intended by the context of my prompt. Stability, on the other hand, you can see it has a little bit more of a cinematography kind of flair here. It's got a higher dynamic range. It looks more professionally lit. The shininess of the vehicle implies that it's a classic car. I'd say this is a step in the right direction toward what I was picturing based on the prompt. And one of its peers, Midjourney, goes with a completely different style, at least with the base settings. Now, all of these you can tweak and improve your prompt or change the input settings in a number of ways. But these were all just straight out of the box. I gave them all the same prompt and no messing with any of the settings. And you can see they get pretty sophisticated pretty quickly. Long gone are the days where you have to count the number of fingers to see whether or not that character is real or not. As you can see, especially our third mechanic here looks very plausibly human. There are a couple of types of learning that these systems are relying on. This is the smallest nutshell ever to hold information. So I'm really just using these as a couple of waypoints describing how these things are learning so that you can get a sense of what kind of requirements they have. First, you'll hear the term deep learning. This is talking about using a large amount of pre-labeled data. So if you're trying to train a self-driving car, you need that thing to understand what stop signs look like, what bicycles look like, what motorcycles look like, and so on. If you're familiar with some of those examples, it's probably because systems like reCAPTCHA have been using CAPTCHA human input to label these images so that they can then train their deep learning systems to identify those same things that those humans had just identified. Another type is called reinforcement learning. This is where you have a limited knowledge of the intended output, but you have some sort of result score. A good example of this is playing a game. One of the neural nets that I was playing with myself taught itself how to play Snake. And the way you do that is use the high score as feedback, and it'll naturally try and maximize that high score. These two terms, they can overlap quite a bit. These two methodologies can even be used on the same project, and there are other methodologies that I'm not getting into, but you get a sense of what kinds of data these systems are able to work with. So let's dive into those examples. These are just a grab bag of things related to e-commerce that I've seen mentioned in listicle top 10 kind of blog entries, and I'd like to sort of peel back whether or not I think some of these are actually plausible, especially in the immediate future. Personalized shopping. I see this one called out a lot. Now, I think that personal assistants are absolutely on the horizon. The promise that we had of smart speakers sort of changing commerce and all this voice-based purchasing behavior never really manifest. Like, a few of us might have purchased a thing or two using Alexa or the like, but it didn't really go anywhere. I think that's going to likely change. The reason that you don't necessarily make a lot of purchases over a smart speaker right now is because you don't trust the system to be smart enough to make the decision for you. Do the research, compare reviews, weigh the costs and benefits necessarily, or even know whether or not that price is a reasonable deal. That's all going to go away. If you can make those decisions, you can probably show somebody else how to make those same decisions. If you can show somebody else how to make decisions, you can take that same data and train a bot for it. I haven't seen a good one yet, but there's nothing technically hindering the development of a good personal shopping assistant in a way that we have never seen before. What I don't think is as likely is improving personalization on sites. Now, this is showing my bias for mid-market, sort of between maybe 1 and 100 million in annual revenue on an e-commerce site. Much, much larger sites than that, they have different kinds of games that they can play with their data where the sample sizes aren't restricted in the same way it is for mid-market. So in mid-market, you get sold personalization stuff all the time. Most of those are using the worst statistical sample size you can have of 1. And they claim to use some sort of cleverness, and machine learning almost certainly gets dropped in the pitch, but good segmentation should do a better job than personalization using magic. So I don't think that AI is going to make this already sort of fuzzy and nebulous benefit any better. If anything, it's going to make it more opaque and hand-wavy. So I'll believe it when I see it, but the math isn't there. Now, for customer service, I think there's a huge possibility here. I think that chatbots are going to be indistinguishable from humans within the context that they're developed for. ChatGPT right now sounds plausibly capable as a customer service agent with no training and no context on the data. Now, it'll actually make things up right now, and I think that the accuracy of the things that the bot actually provides that shopper is the hurdle. If we can train them in such a way that they can rely on data that's already on the site, say FAQs or your About Us section or your contact information, or even here are your order processing and customer complaint resolution pathways. If you have a flowchart somewhere you're training humans on, I'm pretty optimistic that the AI systems will be able to use that. And I believe that the biggest challenge between what we have yesterday and what we'll have tomorrow is the natural language processing part, and that part is more and more a solved thing. So if we have something that uses a flowchart-like logic, Watson from IBM, as far as I can tell, is a glorified flowchart, then you pair that with an actual natural language processor, and you have an interface that allows a shopper that doesn't necessarily know your systems and processes to navigate them through them cleanly. Forecasting and logistics get called out a lot. Catalog expansion is one Google's tried a couple of times. Not buying it. I think for the mid-market, once again, if you're Amazon or even if you're HomeDepot.com, you can do things here that I'm leaning against for the mid-market because of the sheer limitation of the data there. AI can't beat math. And so when you have something like forecasting, where maybe at the base level it's just a linear extrapolation, the AI isn't necessarily going to know any better than whatever your extrapolation is already. Foreseeing the future is guesswork. No amount of guesswork is ever going to be foolproof. And so trying to put this in an AI box really just means that you're not going to have somebody to shake your finger at when the numbers are completely nonsense. It's not going to be that useful, even if it happens to be right most of the time, because when it's wrong, it won't be able to explain how it got to that number. So the opacity of the system and the lack of accountability make me anxious about this, whether or not it's even accurate. Dynamic pricing. There are I would say, two primary kinds of pricing. There's margin up and there's competition down. So in the first case, you're starting with, okay, here are my COGS. I need to make X% across my catalog to keep the lights on. And so here's the price that I need to charge. That's your default starting position if you don't know anything about the market, you don't know anything about your competition, and you need to start somewhere, right? For that kind of thing, well, that's just algebra. You don't need AI for that. AI makes it unnecessarily complicated and opaque. However, when you're dealing with the competitive side, I think that there might be some room for AI to do things that have been traditionally handled by auction simulations and things like that, but those can be extremely complex as well and chaotic. Now you're starting to resemble something that the AI might actually be able to sink its teeth into. However, I also have concerns about the opacity. We don't have great ways of getting an AI to explain its decisions yet. And for pricing, that's a little close to my jugular vein for a lack of accountability, but it might be good at it across an entire catalog, even if I can't ask it why it chose that price for that product. Fraud detection. This, I think, is right in the wheelhouse of what these systems can do. Humans have been pretty good at pattern recognition for the entirety of our existence. AI has only gotten really good at it in the past generation or so, but I think that it is going to continue to advance, and it can do it at scale. We can't. So what we're really looking at is just being able to do human-like pattern recognition, but with better consistency and across much larger sets of data. I think false positives may present a challenge, but we may end up with sort of checks and balances system. Humans invented multi-branched governments because we knew we had chaotic systems with competing priorities and incentives, and we needed some sort of way to balance that. We may end up needing some sort of AI system to keep our AI systems in check. That may also help with some of the opacity and accountability issues we've discussed before, but it would also help thin out false positives when you're talking about fraud detection and other kinds of systems like that. Visual search. Now, this is fun. I've been mostly talking about the large language model side, but on the image processing side, both generation and interpretation, these systems have advanced incredibly in the past year. Google Lens was already pretty good, and that was the past generation. I don't think you're likely to be typing your searches or even speaking your searches in cases where you want to find a product. I think you could probably take any given object on my desk and take a photo of it with a Google Lens or a future generation of a similar tool and use that as if I had physically described the product in text. Sentiment analysis, kind of like the visual search, is going to be knocked out of the park. I can build a static system. I did a net promoter score system, for example, that was processing hundreds of thousands of reviews a week in the peak of its season. And I was able to take a free form open text box of input, categorize that as to its relevancy to 7 different categories of feedback, and whether that was a positive or a negative feedback within that category. That was a very lightweight, very effective system, better than 99% accurate. However, it was static, so it wouldn't adapt to the changes in the way that the language is used or the attention that shoppers are paying to various components of their experience, whether it's the product or the store or anything else. So I think that while I could build a lightweight system that did sentiment analysis, this is really the kind of area where AI's ability to pick up on nuance is going to be really powerful. So let's talk about the long run. I mentioned that I thought that voice shopping was going to get another crack, but I think it's going to pretty quickly be replaced with automated shopping. And by that I mean I might tell my smart speaker I need paper towels, but I don't need to be a party to the conversation about what price is good enough, what brand do I want. I think that the system would be entirely capable of doing its own price comparisons and reviewing the entirety of the reviews for that product, probably even separating out obvious spam within those, identifying the most authentically quality reviews, and then weighing that against the difference in price or possibly the trustworthiness of the vendor, place that order without my feedback, and just let me know that the mission was accomplished. Those things are just going to be another kind of plumbing in the same kind of way that restaurants have adapted to DoorDash and Grubhub. That kind of logistics network produces a different use case, and that different use case gets served by a slightly different kind of business. We're going to see that same kind of split within the types of shopping. especially when it comes to commodity, non-price sensitive goods. This automated shopping pathway may not become the largest part of the online e-commerce ecosystem. Humans love to shop, and we tend to have an opinion about the things we want to invest our hard-earned money into. But for the rest of it, I think that product differentiation is going to become a larger part of a brand's identity. The messaging is just not going to be as critical for those kinds of high-volume commodity, low-consideration purchases. Another way of putting this is to describe the type of shopper we're dealing with. I was talking about automated shopping, but maybe we should really be talking about human shoppers and AI shoppers. If we task the AI with accomplishing the goal that we would have otherwise needed to accomplish ourselves, the way that that AI accomplishes it is going to be distinct from the way a human does it, because it's going to have different parameters and it's going to be potentially taking a lot more input. An AI can actually read every single one of the 12,000 reviews for that safety razor. You're not going to. And it can probably tell which ones are spam, leaving you with a much more accurate picture, unless there's an arms race on the AI writing those spam reviews. But I think we're going to see those kinds of things come out as a checks and balances kind of system for sure. As I was thinking about this all automated shopping ecosystem, this kind of transaction that we haven't really had to support before, I realized the plumbing looked fairly similar actually. It's going to be a little bit like a marketplace. You don't control necessarily the entire shopper experience on Amazon or even other platforms like Walmart, and yet you're still fulfilling orders that are coming through there, or you're even producing the raw materials for the product description and photos that are then hosted on those marketplaces. In a similar way, although not resulting in human eyeballs, we're going to see the same kind of plumbing deployed to fulfill this kind of back-end automated logistics system for purchases being made without human intervention. And finally, just pay attention, but don't let the hype get to you. No one knows what's coming. Anyone who claims that they do is lying or delusional. We can place our bets, we can eliminate the impossible, but everything that remains is entirely on the table, just at different degrees of probability. So I would say pay attention to the areas where it seems like this kind of technology is going to have the most impact, and I would be skeptical of situations where just because you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Almost any problem can be solved with AI, but if it can be solved with arithmetic, use arithmetic. We're still waiting to see how some of the legislation pans out on how all of this is deployed, but with an eye to caution, here are all the AIs that I used to help produce this very presentation. What you'll see is missing from here is Bing and Bard. Like I said, I haven't played with all the toys yet. There are so many of them and more of them coming every single day. So I expect that we're going to have a lot more to talk about a year from now.